Hi, I'm Becca Snow, a Cherokee from the Smoky Mountains of western North Carolina. I live near the site of Chota, which once was the capital of the Cherokee Nation.
And I'm Stormy Hope from Williamsburg, the colonial capital of Virginia. Welcome to Emissaries of Peace, this month's electronic field trip brought to you by the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation.
An emissary is a person who is sent on a special mission. Nations often send emissaries to carry important messages, negotiate agreements, or make peace. Europeans, colonists, and American Indians frequently used emissaries during the colonial period in American history.
In the 1750s, during the French and Indian War, Virginia and other British colonies sent emissaries to Cherokee countries. And Cherokee emissaries visited colonial cities like Philadelphia, Charleston, and Williamsburg. The British considered the Cherokee one of their most important allies, and hundreds of Cherokee fought side by side with colonial soldiers against the French and their Indian allies in the Ohio Valley.
But the British also wanted Cherokee land for their own and wanted the Cherokee people to be subjects of their king. My people want to remain free and independent. These tensions with the British led to conflict and war, and a British and colonial army invaded our homelands.
It was a difficult time for the Cherokee.
Soldiers burned the Cherokee towns that lay closest to the frontiers of North and South Carolina. As Cherokee refugees fled to the overhill towns that lay to the west in the Appalachian Mountains, another army gathered in Virginia and prepared to attack.
The residents and refugees of the overhill towns were caught between armies. They decided to make peace rather than risk destruction, and so the Cherokees traveled north to hold a council with the leader of the Virginian Army, Lieutenant Colonel Adam Stevens.
While I consider myself a soldier, not a scholar, it has fallen upon me to undertake the duty of recording secretary for this council between the Cherokee and Lieutenant Colonel Stevens. About 400 came to our camp to sue for peace, which was soon granted. Gunagadoga also requested that an emissary return to the Cherokee country to convince all of the people there that we will keep the peace.
Nagata, Aniyawea, the Ganasa, Yanegawata, Ni, Os, Awas, the Juta, Ane, Jelak, Aniyawe.
So that our people at home will see that you have nothing but good intentions toward the Cherokee people.
I thank you for your kind words today. The path between our nations is now clear of all obstacles.
Aya, Galieli Cheha, Osta, La, Yihinegi, Goiga, No, Diganana, Digani Yawi. Ukali Yada.
DJ Wego, Ihust, Doesn't Kanti, Itlanako.
Dishka A, Digstudi, Digitoli, Digatagi, Ahuli, Nigohila, Godante, Haguenasha, Adawe La Gishka.
I know.
I still don't know where my mother and my little sister are.
Shh, quiet now, come. You have seen more of war than any child should.
Are we doing the right thing? Making peace with these people? Can we trust them?
Do we have any choice? Having the will to fight means nothing if you do not have the means. A Cherokee man can beat 10 of those soldiers in battle, but not if he has nothing to fight with.
Guns are useless without powder and shot.
That is it, isn't it? Can we even live anymore without the things those traders bring?
I do not think so.
We have come to depend on their metal tools, knives and guns. We especially need firearms to hunt for deer skins that we can trade.
Yes, and metal kettles last longer than our clay pots.
Without deer skins, how can we trade? We need trade goods and weapons. We know what will happen if that army marches across the mountains into our towns. Those drums.
Smoke, fire, and destruction.
We do not have many choices. The French traders cannot or will not supply us. We need blankets, pots, and ammunition to hunt and to help us against our enemies. If others have muskets and we do not, then we are not as strong.
Before the war, the people of Carolina and Virginia would quarrel over who would give us the most presents and sell their goods to us the cheapest.
That is true. They wanted all of our deerskins for themselves.
Perhaps we will see those days return. We came to make peace with the Virginians, while others have gone to Carolina to do the same thing.
If there's one thing we can count on, it is the greed of those people. Keeping them fighting with each other is our best hope.
I believe we may congratulate ourselves, gentlemen. We have had nothing but requests for peace from this delegation, and I am informed that other Cherokee emissaries are on their way to Carolina to sign a formal peace treaty.
Encouraging, sir. But don't you believe others will be headed west to seek assistance from the French?
Very likely. They always try to play us off one another. They are certainly subtle diplomats, are they not, Ensign Timberlake?
Like most of our Indian neighbors, the Cherokee fear that either the French or we will drive the other out of this country completely.
Indeed. They have spoken quite plainly of this. They see quite clearly, and the French certainly remind them, that should we drive the French away, we shall spread over the entire continent of North America.
Aye, and we will.
Not so easily done. There are 10,000 Cherokee who love their independence as much as any of us. Better to have them as friends, even lukewarm friends, than enemies.
Exactly. And so we come to the request for an emissary to go to Chota. Gentlemen, I cannot order any of you to go. However, I think it is important to show good our faith in them.
And if I may say so, sir, to observe their country in case war should break out again.
And this is well. I would have a volunteer then who would make a close observation of the route from here to Chota, the location and size of their towns, the number of fighting men, and every other detail.
Sir, I would be honored if you would allow me to volunteer for this duty.
Understand that I cannot order you or any other to this journey. I cannot ask anyone to make such a sacrifice by traveling into unknown dangers or unforeseen accidents, and I cannot encourage you to do so.
The Cherokee have seen me employed in drawing up the Articles of Peace, and they may be inclined to see me as the proper person to give an account of it to their countrymen. And if I may venture to add, sir, for love of my country, I would not permit us to lose such an advantage as this mission could provide.
Very good, Ensign Timberlake. I have great confidence in your abilities. I cannot send a large party of men. That would raise suspicions among the Cherokee. But you may choose a trusty man or two to accompany you.
I shall prepare to depart immediately.
When you arrive, you must seek out the great chief Ostenaco, who is familiar to many of you gentlemen.
He was a frequent emissary to Williamsburg before the war, was he not?
Indeed. You should have seen him riding down Duke of Gloucester Street in Governor Dinwiddie's coach.
He was always a friend to Virginia, and maybe one again. He has sent word that he will come to Williamsburg for a council with Governor Fauquier. His influence could help us reopen Virginia's trade with the Cherokee. And so, gentlemen, peace and a successful journey to Chota.
To peace.
The Cherokee delegation returned home by land. Timberlake tried to travel by river since he wanted to provide England with information about traveling through Cherokee territory just in case a war broke out again. His journey took 22 days, but he only brought food for 10.
Timberlake's group nearly starved because he ignored the advice of the Cherokee, who told him that the water in the river was too low for canoes that time of year.
They finally arrived in Cherokee country, cold and tired, and found Ostenaco.
When you are older, I will tell you of these days of struggle. I have smoked the pipe with Timberlake to impress upon him my desire for friendship and peace. I feared this representative of the English was lost along the way and had died as the others returned 10 days ago.
You have been most kind to welcome me into your home and family. These are gifts to you and your wife to recall the happy days before the recent troubles between our people.
Hutsali helega, hatsawa dahi dohahi.
Delegations from the Cherokee are gathered here in Chota. The meeting place is large enough to contain 500 persons, as it seems all are welcome to sit in on meetings and participate in the conduct of government. They seem pleased with the articles of peace, and I smoked several pipes. It is a ceremony I wish I could avoid, as the smoking is very disagreeable to me. But, as it is a token of their friendship and they would be offended if I did not comply, I am obliged to put on the best face I am able. But the delays caused by their many invitations and ceremonies concern me. I must return to Virginia with Ostenaco as soon as possible.
There will be another council at Cherokee tomorrow.
What message will the women send back to Virginia with those white men?
Well, I'm ready for peace. We need the traders to return. The emissaries who went to see the French governor came back with nothing.
The army that burned our town came from Carolina. I would rather trade with Virginians than those scoundrels from Charleston.
I think most of the Women's Council agrees. We will choose a speaker tonight to deliver the message tomorrow.
Ito way geshe este no dadalen he dana esta. Aya no chula. Here no gado he. Una zeli anigi dua. Here no zozatle he. Ihe no skiwata he do he. Tilang wototi. Togi kanawadansti nole aniya. Iyo no skina ne dadanelana. Go husti. Yana zalstashi hana e. Nogo, dice yadanilanga, hiya no adaneti, higi kanohesh higali nulstanai.
'Tis their way of bidding you a hearty welcome inside Timberlake, and to make amends of their part in the war. We'll go to the council house now to receive the messages you are to carry to the governor.
As an emissary, Timberlake was expected to carry messages from the Cherokee people back to Virginia.
The Cherokees, like many American Indians, used dancing, speech-making, and smoking the pipe as a part of their diplomatic process. They presented strings and woven belts of bead called wampum that was supposed to help an emissary remember what had been said.
These strings and belts were kind of an archive. They would be carefully kept by those who received them as a record of treaties and councils between friends and allies.
Anit Shalaki, I Kantena, Hunatuli, Tohi, Tika Teti, I Gohita, Anikalishi, Nada, Ujistu, Lugishka, Nohle, Ganula, Hatashka, Igohida. Hugiha. Utugi. Nagada. Gigaha. Dunturna. Dandawa. Digani Shote. Hawini. Gado. Igohida. No le. Gandeshki. Justagistehi.
The women of the Cherokee Nation wish to live in peace with the English, so long as the sun shines and the grass grows. They hope that all the bloody weapons of war may be buried deep in the earth forever, and that the trade may be reopened. Hold on. What do you expect the reaction will be when you return carrying a diplomatic message from Cherokee women to one of the governors of His Majesty's largest and most valuable colonies?
Well, women are the heads of the clans. Some even accompany men to war. They are present at treaty signings. They speak in council. Their opinions are considered in making decisions.
Best not to spread that notion around when we get back to Virginia. Who there could imagine women fighting in war or making decisions about politics and diplomacy? I mean, do you think the gentlemen of Virginia's House of Burgesses are ready for that?
May I present this petition, Madam Burgess?
Ladies, present your muskets, please.
Gentlemen, I am pleased to see Ostenaco here in Williamsburg. But the size of his delegation is extraordinary. 70 men? My council has gathered here to consider how we should treat these visitors.
Ensign Timberlake informs me that Ostenaco is a great advocate for peace. And although the number of men in town may be large, Ensign Timberlake was able to turn back many others who wished to come.
Virginia has much to gain from restoring trade with the Cherokee. But do not forget, we just fought a war with these people and brought them to peace at the point of a sword. It was costly enough to entertain these delegations with lavish presents when we needed them to fight the French. Now, all His Majesty's governors have been instructed to cut such needless expenses.
If I may speak, sir. Ostenaco is a man of great influence, and was, as you all know, a friend to Virginia before this recent conflict. Not so long ago, he was riding in the governor's carriage down Duke of Gloucester Street as crowds cheered. While I believe that the Cherokees now desire peace, there are still those who look to the French for support.
Sir, if I'm not mistaken, several Cherokee emissaries have traveled to our Carolina neighbors. Why should the Charleston merchants profit from the Cherokee trade instead of Virginians?
If I understand you, gentlemen, it would be in our interest, both for Virginia and the Crown, to show some generosity toward Ostenaco and his party. Thank you, Colonel Stephen. Ensign Timberlake, you've been most helpful. I believe we can agree that a meeting with Ostenaco and a few of the leading men would be appropriate. We will entertain them in not too lavish a fashion, and there will be no coach rides on this visit to Williamsburg.
Nodi, Kanana, Justagi Sha, Negada, Nundele Sha, Ani Yunwi, Utugi, Ugiha, Deneski, Dadani Luti Chai.
He hopes that finally, with peace restored, our traders will return to the Cherokee Nation.
These belts and strings of wampum are a record of our former agreement. certain proofs of my intention to preserve this peace forever. We are all children of a common and great father, King George III. I will encourage our Virginia traders to return to your country this year.
Please, come in. I have taken the liberty of having a light repast prepared for you.
Ya ugodi di da de logosti ani yui know yan di yosta neli ga gigi ha aya di gaina sa.
I say no hala iga nani ya ha da di no gay ada gula julu cha way do la june na sa squani ya ame ego he june way sa unigo di gay sti kalo dagu say sti yi kana ego hida
aya agigo tandi here do yuk da yigi.
Behold, my friends, an image of our great king, George III.
Kohidi na guadulisko za tandi ugawiyu agidoda.
Ostenaco has wanted to see the king, his father, for a long time.
Skino hiya nuste zagandiyu asheno dagudi zagwawa tandi agwasha.
This is his image, but Ostenaco is determined to see him in person.
Ale tsano da gesi kani hagwaduliska because da na ha.
And he will not leave this town until his wish is granted.
Asheno, squista nade ti you, who ta giha, agua, di sesti, ani yog nega.
When I am once again in my home, I shall speak of this great voyage and my desire to learn more of England and its king. I have taken leave from my friends and family. My people know to expect punishment equal to any offense should they act contrary to the articles we have agreed to. And as he has accompanied me in the journey thus far, I have asked for Lieutenant Timberlake to accompany me to England.
Ugawi yuhi ane galisi elisti yiges dala ane yuia tohi
On the 16th of June of this year, 1762, we arrived in Plymouth, England. As the days have passed, my companions have expressed their anxiety to see the king. The uncommon appearance of the Cherokee has drawn after them great crowds of people of all ranks, wherever they appear, be it at taverns, Vauxhall, or other places of entertainment. And the newspapers report our every move. How I shall pay for all this, I do not know.
They gather around us so tightly. Is there even room to draw a breath?
They're always staring and touching. How rude.
Do you think we'll see the king today?
Who knows? He said that he has been sick, but that he will be well soon, and then we will see him. Hila hiyu, tigesa, dagaitse li yawi, usega, hane hangi, asheno, igatzik utzik, ande nashan.
Some time ago, my nation was in darkness, but that darkness is now cleared up.
You know, used to go, Zalaki, Yula, Anigalisi, Askaya, Skino, Salagi Atsi East Geshesti.
If Cherokee shall kill an Englishman, that Cherokee shall be put to death.
You know, Aganyi, Anedo, Yonikala, no lay, Yani no hey, I, Ditagachi Stanti Stani.
If any of our headmen retain resentment against the English for their kinfolk who have been killed, and if any of them speak a bad word concerning it, I will deal with them as I see fit.
No, so na, Adagat ye, Gay Sesti, I, the God say, E Yawi.
No more problems shall be heard in my nation. I speak not with two tongues, and I am embarrassed of those who do.
Aya, Dagatse, no he sell, Nigada, Hagigoha, Anigali see ye.
I shall tell my people all that I have seen in England. Nudale, Hugiha, Galohisti.
The English king did not smoke as is our custom, but I am pleased to have delivered a message of peace from my people. I will return to my home knowing I have done what I could to secure our lands and keep us free.
Within a year of the Cherokees' visit to England, King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763. The proclamation forbade colonists from settling across the Appalachian Mountains on lands reserved for American Indian nations.
The Cherokee Nation kept its promise to remain at peace with the British. When American revolutionaries invaded Cherokee country in 1776, my people defended their homeland with help from the British. We have continued to struggle since then to preserve our sovereignty and way of life. We are still here, nearly 300,000 of us, in the eastern band of the Cherokee Nation in North Carolina, the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, and the United Kituwa Band. And many more Americans claim Cherokee descent, living in every state and all over the world.
The Cherokee Nation's story of struggle and survival is one of many in the United States.